So this episode of Tech Editor Restores is going to be my old coffee table. My parents bought it probably sometime in the 1960s, and it's definitely due for some work. I mean, it's good and solid. It's solid wood. I don't like working with any veneer, but there's some marks, there's some watermarks. So what I'm thinking is sand it down and then decide how I'm going to finish it. Now for this sanding, I'm going to use Norton Pro Sand 100 grit. I found that this blue sandpaper, it holds up a whole lot better than standard sandpaper. So we'll see what's going to happen. Well, as you can see, that's not going to take very long at all. And I don't need one of those fancy $1,000 sanders. Okay, there's the entire top done for a 1/4 sheet of premium sandpaper. To me, that's economy. Now under each leg, they've got this kind of a rubbery cover, and under that there seems to be some kind of a plastic knob. If you'll focus, there we go. So all of that's coming off because I'm going to put something else on there. And in the center of it, there seems to be some kind of a metal spike. I don't know why they'd put a metal spike holding that down, because that's just going to scratch the floor. So that plastic isn't going to do any good. Maybe my parents put this rubber thing over it, or the factory did, I don't know. But in any event, it's got to go. Well, there's what it was. It was a staple that probably an air gun drove it in. But the thing is, if you turn it around, there's the head of it. So what good was that? Because being on a rounded surface, right there, all that was going to do is scratch. So I sanded as far as I could with the sander with the legs on. So I got one leg off, and that's sanded. So I'll take this other leg off. There's 4 screws, and they glued it on, so you have to pull it away. And then I can finish the sand. And there is the underside edge done and all 4 legs. Interestingly, I thought this was solid wood. However, when I pulled this leg off, right there, that is kind of like a sawdust and glue. So maybe that's a veneer on top. Well, I didn't sand through it, so I guess I'm all right. But anyway, now I've just got to sand it with 220 now that I've done 100 to get it ready for staining. Now that I've got the legs and the top all sanded to 100, I'm going to take some 220 finish and my Harbor Freight sanding block. I'm going to sand these legs to 220, then I'm going to glue them back on, and because I can stain them attached, but it's a whole lot easier to sand them when they're off. So I'm just going to go over it, just kiss it, just to smooth it up just a little bit, and then I'll put the legs back on. So now with the legs sanded, it's time to glue and screw the legs back on. Now some of them had glue on the side. Most of them, or I'll take that back. All of them had glue on the side. Very few had some glue on the bottom. It wasn't consistent during the original assembly. So what I'm going to do is glue everything, just 'cause. This is just Titebond 2 Ultimate Wood Glue. I'll get it aligned. I want to make sure that I get the screw back in the hole. There we go. I would rather use the old holes. All right. There. Just got to do the other three. Now with the table back on its feet, the legs all glued and sanded to 220, I've got to sand the top to 220. Now it's sanded to 220. What I want to do is wipe it off with some mineral spirits to see what it would look like with a natural stain. You use odorless mineral spirits and get a cloth, and I'll just put a little bit on because I got to wipe the whole thing down with mineral spirits anyway, but I'm really curious what it's going to look like if I just put a natural stain on. That really doesn't look bad. No. That looks pretty darn good. It's probably the natural is going to be a little bit lighter on that oak. I think that's what I'm going to go with it. I mean, we debated between, because a lot of the living room is dark walnut, because we're going for the 20s, 30s. And we could do this in dark walnut. But I'm afraid I might not get the contrast, or it won't be as great. So I think we're just going to go with my tried and true Old Masters Natural and Old Masters Poly. So it's all wiped down. And I wanted to mention, I did some research on this coffee table. And it is built exactly like a Lane coffee table. It's got the same legs, the same basic top. But because there is no stamp under it, I'm assuming Lane stamped everything they did, and they serial numbered it. So this was a Lane copy, because it was probably a lot cheaper for my parents to purchase than a true Lane. So it looks like a Lane, it'll work like a Lane, it just doesn't have the stamp, and I really don't care. I'm not going to sell it. I just wanted to refurbish it and use it. At this point, the mineral spirits has now dried. I'm going to take my Old Masters Natural wiping stain and start to put it on the top. And that's the finish we're going to get. I think it's looking pretty good. Well, I have waited the prerequisite 15 minutes, and now I'm going to wipe it off like the instructions say, which is to go over it crossways against the grain. Then go with the grain. I would say that it's a bit darker than the original factory finish, but then again it's still wet. So but in any event, it's so much better than it was, and as I've said in every other restore video, that no matter how bad a job I do, it's going to end up better than it was when I started. So since I took those plastic feet off the bottom and pulled those that staple out, I went to Home Depot and I found these furniture glides. So what I have to do is drill bit and a drill down in, then take this and drive it down in with my mallet, and I will have some feet that were better than the factory put on. So I took the little foot out of the package and I found a drill bit that is just smaller. The size is what? 5/32. So then I measured kind of like that, put my piece of tape so that I'm going to drill a hole just slightly longer, and then I just have to drill. So what I'm going to attempt to do is drill down through where the old staple was. that will go in. Let's see what happens. There we go. That's the first foot. And in short order, I got all 4 feet put on. That's going to protect my luxury vinyl plank floor in the living room. So now I'm going to start building up the finish. Got Old Masters clear polyurethane in satin. I'm just going to put 1 coat on, let it dry, and we'll go from there. Maybe a second coat, maybe a third coat. And then in between each coat, it will be rubbed out with 2000 wet dry sandpaper. I don't think I'm going to go, no, I'm not going to go with the gloss. I think the gloss is a little too much. Probably the 2 or 3 coats of satin will probably look pretty good. So that's how it's going to be. I'll come back when I'm done with the top. And there's what the top looks like with 1 coat of satin poly. I just got to let that dry, and then I will rub it out, and we will go from there. So now that the satin poly has dried, I'm taking some 2000 wet dry sandpaper, and I'm going to just give it a light sanding to make it nice and smooth. Just take off the high spots. And you can feel the difference from there to there. So that's what I'm going to do. Then I'm going to let that dry and put another coat on of the satin poly. So after the water is all dried up from the wet sanding, I'm going to put my second coat of the Old Masters satin poly on. It'll be pretty much like first, except it's going to fill in a little bit more. And hopefully eventually we'll have a nice glass surface. And each coat tends to make the color a little bit richer. There's nothing the matter with that. So I'm just finishing up the second coat. Every coat, as far as I'm concerned, makes it look better and better. I'm still on the fence whether to just do 3 coats of satin like I did on the kitchen table, or do a coat of the gloss like I did on that after doing the 2 coats of poly, or the satin poly. So I don't know. I'm on the fence about it. So there you go. That is the second coat. And we'll just let that dry overnight, and I can sand it down with 2000 tomorrow morning. And with the second coat of the satin poly dry overnight, we will do another quick wet sand and see how the finish is. To me, when it gets like glass, I'll go with it. Until then, I'll keep adding coats. Well, she who must be obeyed has decided that I like 3 coats of satin and not gloss. although I can always add gloss later. So I am going to do what she tells me I like and add the third coat of satin, and then rub that out and then wax it. I got the last little bit of the top here, and then I'll finish off with the sides and the legs. And maybe she's right that all I need is satin, not gloss. Well, we'll find out in about 6 to 7 hours, depending on the dry time. But again, no matter how bad a job I do, it's going to be better than it was, because originally, as you saw, it was a mess. So at this point in time, the third coat of the Old Masters Satin Poly has dried for 6-7 hours. Now I'm going to rub it out again with the 2000 wet dry sandpaper, and I may just leave it at that with a little bit of Howard's Feed and Wax and orange oil. We'll see. Well, that does give a nice smooth surface. So at this point in time, I'm just finishing up the wet sand. If you've never wet sanded, water's your friend. You don't want to gob up the grit on the sandpaper, nor do you want to overheat it. So the water will carry away any debris. It's not like glass, but it for satin, I think it's pretty good. All I got to do now is the legs and let it dry, and then a little wax, and this project is done. So the last stage in finishing will be to take some Howard's Feed and Wax with orange oil and beeswax and put it on, and I think you have to let it set for 20 minutes and then wipe it off. So I've been soaking this for the last half hour in some warm water because the stuff is kind of thick normally. So that does give it a nice sheen. We'll see how it is after 20 minutes. Well, we finally reached the end of the road. All I've got to do now is rub out the Howard's Feed and Wax. And that'll be a quick process, hopefully. Well, looking at that sheen and feeling the top, I guess she who must be obeyed was probably right that it didn't need to be the high gloss like I did on this one. So that looks pretty good. All I got to do is the legs and put it back in its original position in the living room. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Tech Editor Restores. Thanks for watching.